Good morning, everyone. Hope you're happy, healthy, and well. It's time for a new book review where I share some life lessons out of books that I have been reading. I thought today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Rather than have one book, one review, I'll talk about some of the questions that I have had floating around in my mind and what I have been doing to overcome or get answers to them. The questions I've been floating around in my mind: how can I understand this very complicated world? I'm someone who is curious, who likes to dabble in a lot of things, also tries to understand that the world around her is really quite complicated. How did it get to this point? What is it that I can do to make the world better? What is it that I can do to educate myself and understand those patterns and the trends that are happening around me, and how to fit into that, but also feel comfortable in knowing that I'm doing the right thing for myself and my family. As you can understand, you're probably having the same questions because the world currently is in a state of flux. What I usually do is I like to read fiction and then I draw out some life lessons out of into my own life. But you know, when I read fiction, if I'm really just reflecting on my own life and my own actions and my own behaviors. But what if I extended that lens more outwards and try and understand what is the world around me, what is going on there, and then looking at that and bringing that into my own life. Recently, I've been getting back into nonfiction, and nonfiction with regards to the genre of politics, of the world today, and also trying to understand the impact of technology, the impact of energy, the impact of the need for water, the impact of climate change as to what is going on and what will happen in the future. Of course, we don't know what will happen in the future, but I guess the one steady element is the human element, us, what we can do. Starting with that, I thought I would share some of the books that I have been currently reading, some of the books that I'd like to read, but also books that I have read and how I've linked all these themes together. So it's not going to be a review on one book. It's simply a conglomeration of different ideas and different hesitations I have about trying to understand the world around me. Now, these are my books in the sense that these are the ones chosen for myself to read and to try and understand. I know that there are so many other books out there that can do this for you. I would like you to share those in the comments below. Share the books that also help you make sense of the world. How do you educate yourself? Who are the people that you read? So this question really started by me reading this book called Wasteland, A World in Permanent Crisis by Kaplan. This book is completely new. I was the first person to borrow it from the library. Kaplan is an expert in this aspect, and he's also written a whole heap of books, but it was my first introduction to his writing. It's split into 3 parts and it's written like a long essay. It does just that. It talks about the world as it is with the current crisis. He starts off his first essay by making parallels to the Weimar time, if I'm saying that incorrectly, Germans out there, I'm so sorry, the Weimar time, just pre-World War II in Germany, where there was the slow rise of populism and nationalism, what it resulted to with regards to World War II. And the reason he's called it the Wasteland is that it is from T.S. Eliot's Wasteland poem, where the poem depicts the life of after World War I, where society was so broken down, they were destitute, empty and disillusioned with life as it was because they had been through a terrible war with a huge loss of life. When I read it, it depicted the images that you had of the wastelands of the World War I battlefields, the greyness, the darkness, just the horror of it. I guess this book sets us up for a similar feel of modern life. I did read some reviews saying that it's quite pessimistic and that he doesn't offer any actions or any strategies to overcome it. If you're someone who is looking for ways of, well, what can we do? How can we overcome this? then I wouldn't say, don't read this book, but just go into this book understanding that he really just paints the picture of life as it is today and how bad it can get. Some of the life lessons out of this one also for me was his mentioning that geography is lessening. He says that the world, everything's kind of discovered. Everything is, all land is used. With social media, with technology, we've all come very close to each other. And what impacts one area will impact another area thousands of miles down the line. And because of this closeness, it creates mobs. It creates a feeling that people are hemmed in some way. Bad messages and bad messengers can create this feeling of claustrophobia in this large world. Also mentions that it's dangerous to allow other people to do our thinking for us. He made some connections to things which I thought were a little bit pedantic in some way, and those two pedantic areas, or two things that he mentioned but didn't really go into them quite deeply, was the focus on the casualization of dress standards and also the grammar deteriorating. So with grammar deteriorating, the casualization, I can't even say the word, of dress standards was depicting a society that was decaying. In some sense, I guess you could say it, of big empires like the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire. There was a time where that empire had started to decay, and this was reflected in the architecture, which deteriorated, which he mentions here in this book about the urbanization of our cities to the point where they're just grey, dull, boring, which I actually happen to agree, because I actually quite think the architecture of nowadays is actually quite minimalist and brutalist, and I really don't like it. But anyway, I'm thinking, okay, these are the things, are they typified of a society that is decaying? Included in that, he talks about loneliness and alienation, even though we are now closer than ever with technology and social media. Our own neighbour next door could seem so many miles away, even though they are in the same proximity. So he creates this very depressing world of what we have nowadays and all the problems that would stem from it, and why we're going down the path of populism and nationalism and authoritarians. Some things that weren't mentioned in this book, which I thought was a bit strange, was the Israel and Gaza war not mentioned. But nevertheless, I guess this book, while I was reading this one, I was also reading another book which you may be interested in, and one which I would highly recommend. And you can read it either in its full format, or you could read it in the graphic novel format that I did. It is Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. The graphic novel is illustrated by Nora Krug, and I didn't mind the illustrations to this. It kind of reminded me of a journal and scrapbooking. This book was interesting in that it provided the 20 lessons. The focus heavily was on America at this stage, even though I know that all around the world there's a whole heap of different countries, and many countries that aren't even in our news nowadays. And an example is in the Wasteland, Robert Kaplan mentions the rise of Africa and how the increasing population of Africa will see about 40% of the population of the world be from African origin in the years to come. There's a whole heap of things happening in Africa too, but our news doesn't show that. Our news focuses very heavily on what's happening in America at the moment, the impact of China in the seas around Australia, and also a little bit of Europe news. So having that in mind, that our news on TV is only focused on certain things, that gets us to see certain things, that then determines what we think about certain things without us actually exploring and delving into and educating ourselves. So with Timothy Snyder's book, he talks about the 20 different lessons, and he wraps them up in the front pages. Now, the 20 lessons that really hit home for me, a few things which I'll go through. It's number 16, learn from peers in other countries. Now, for me, this has always been a big thing, because I know that I come from a background in Australia. It is an Anglo-Saxon country. It is also very multicultural. And I also look at my own peers and my friendship groups, and I look at the mix that I'm hanging around with, and I want to be hanging around with different people from different backgrounds who also have different religions, because I feel that way having a network of people who come from a variety of different backgrounds really makes me see the world in a different way. I can ask questions of them. We can have conversations. We can discuss, we can debate. They can see things from my point of view. I can see things from their point of view, and I get an appreciation. And I think, very pityingly, that if Robert Kaplan is saying our geography is becoming smaller, yet look at our own peers. Who are we hanging out with? Are we actually learning from each other and with each other about the way we see the world? And so one of the actions I'd love to do more is learning from peers from different countries. And this is why here on this channel, I thought to myself, I really need to read more books from authors who come from different countries. And this is why I value the comments here as well. I value people who watch my YouTube, these rants about books, but then also share who are they reading, why are they reading, what's happening in their country about it. I guess from the comments, we can also see different perspectives and different viewpoints. Another one for me was number 14, establish a private life. A funny thing, a few years back, I was one of these people who jumped on the bandwagon with social media when it first came out, because I saw the value in social connections, and I saw the openness and the brilliant way that social media can connect us into our community and connect us with each other to do exactly what number 16 was saying, which is learning from peers from other countries. But in the last few years, social media has morphed into something completely unrecognizable. That toxicity around pushing a fake information or this disinformation on it, the trolls, the bots, the whole bit, that lost the sense of community for me. And so a few years ago, I decided to stop all social media, knowing that I was cutting all the connections from the people that I had. I basically killed off my career as well, which is something I know that many people cannot and will not do, which I totally get it, because social media now, you need to have an online presence. I was someone who, for my job, I would go around the world and I would be talking about using social technologies for good, social technologies for building a presence. But in the last few years, establishing a private life has been much more important for me. I've removed and deleted and cancelled a lot of the social technologies that I have. I've decided that I do not use artificial intelligence in these tools like YouTube or in any of the other software programs that is being forced onto us. I do not want to train a machine around how I think and what I think and how I do things. I really want to go back and reconnect with having a more of a private life. Also going back to more peer-to-peer connections. So I would highly recommend this book in the graphic novel format. And one lesson I would say is review those 20 lessons and draw out 1, 2 of those lessons and focus in on them and do something in your own life around those so that you can educate yourself with regards to what the world is doing currently and how you can help yourself. While I was reading this Wasteland book, I also thought of another book that I had read some years ago, and it's one I would highly recommend. It is Ian Kershaw's To Hell and Back, Europe 1914 to 1949. When I read this book, I said to my husband, I really recall saying this to him, is that there was something happening in every single country in every year that led up to those 2 big world events. When you read this book, it is dense. There was a lot of things happening. When I read the Kaplan book, I was getting the similar feelings. I recalled this book while reading Kaplan because he mentions how there is so much anxiety and conflict happening in all parts of the world currently, which reminded me of this thing. I'm not preempting and saying there's going to be like a big because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But it was just two parallels that I saw with these two books. One comment he said also was he didn't have a positive view of humanity. In fact, he said human nature will not improve. History is driven by individual men, not just geopolitics. That reminded me so strongly of the book War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, because he too drew on the concept of history being driven by individual men, not just geopolitics. So all these three things really held an idea for me, which then links me to Kaplan's book again, where he draws on literature a lot. You know, sometimes we need to read some nonfiction just to kind of put it all together. And these are just examples I do. When I read a book, I try and link everything up. Now, going back to his human nature comment, another book that was published some years back, which I never read, and yet now, because he mentions it in this book, I'm going to return to this, and it is Rutger Bregman's Humankind, A Hopeful History. This one is not a hopeful history. This one is. You can see now how I read, how one book gives me ideas for the next book. And so now I'm intrigued to read this Humankind book many years after it was published and before the impact of AI. I had read his book Utopia for Realists, but this one was published in 2020. So it was just after COVID, and also before all this hoo-ha of what's happening in the world. So I'm intrigued now to see, has Rutger Bregman changed his stance on humanity? Will human nature improve? Or are we going down the line that's going to get worse and worse? Another thing that I've been doing currently is I've been going back and visiting Christopher Hitchens. I loved Christopher Hitchens, and it's such a pity that he passed away over 10 years ago now. I've been going back to what his writing was and what he was talking about. I decided to read this book, and I'm currently halfway through it. It's his essay on why Orwell matters. This one was published in 2002. This is way before everything that we're seeing in the world today. And yet Orwell also teaches us something about the world as it was back in his day, and his views on authoritarianism, totalitarianism, communism, fascism. And so because I hadn't read this book, which was sitting on my shelf, I thought I'm going to read this book and hopefully draw some link out of all these books that I have been reading, have read, or will read. All in order to understand what we as humans can do to understand the world around us. I am an optimist, and I'd like to think that as humans we can understand what is going on with the world around us, that we will educate ourselves, that we will turn to each other and understand and ask questions of each other and with each other to learn more, to not let big machines and big companies and tech bros do that thinking for us. If we do that, and if we have those conversations, and if we follow the 20 lessons that Timothy Snyder sets out for us, then maybe we have a chance. Maybe we can build a better world of understanding each other. And to number 18, be calm when the unthinkable arrives. All right then, that's it. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. Bye for now.